Join me. I'm gonna count down the top 15 most mysterious artifacts ever discovered. Let's start with number 15, the Holy Jar. Well, while most jars are airtight, the Holy Jar is the exact opposite. For decades, it sat in a 180-piece pile at the Museum of Ontario Archaeology in Canada. However, once it was put together, it baffled researchers as the holes seemed to render it useless. Now, it likely came from an ancient Roman settlement in England, yet due to mixed-up storage records, there's a chance it came from Iraq. Some have speculated that it could have been used to store dormice, which was a popular ancient Roman snack. Others say it held snakes, which were of great religious significance. Yet the truth of the matter is that it's still anyone's guess. Number 14, the Phaistos disc. Found in Crete in 1908, the Phaistos disc has a puzzle that's yet to be solved. You see, the language imprinted on the face of this disc has never been fully decoded, and its symbols are part of no known alphabet, be it ancient or modern. That's not to say that we don't have any clues, though. Some symbols bear resemblance to those found in Linear A and Linear B, which are the ancient languages of the Minoans. Others are similar to hieroglyphics that are often found in the region's ancient sites. Number 13, the Cockno Stone. Being found by chance in the Scottish countryside in 1887, the Cockno Stone is pretty fascinating. Measured in at 13 by 8 meters, it's likely about 5,000 years old and has more than 90 carved inscriptions written into it. Widely considered to have the finest Bronze Age cup and ring carvings in all of Europe, the actual meaning of the inscriptions is still unknown. Many believe that they likely have something to do with astronomy or art. And on my end, I hope the mystery will one day be solved. It'd be pretty cool to find out what that means. Number 12, the Socorro bird. Most historians agree that Wilbur and Orville Wright were the first to achieve flight when they did so in 1903. However, the Socorro bird suggests otherwise. Discovered in 1898 in a burial tomb in Egypt, the Socorro bird is made of wood. It's a few centimeters long and was likely made around 200 BC. Most people believe that the bird is a simple model of Horus, who's a god from Egyptian mythology. Yet many others believe that this is a model of an ancient plane, and it has features like a stabilizing tail, wings, and landing gear. However, we're probably never gonna know for sure. Number 11, the Roman dodecahedron. No one knows why the Roman dodecahedron exists. This strange artifact is a 12-faced piece of metal. Each face has a circular hole, with all the holes connecting to a hollow center, and each corner featuring a protruding knob. Despite having no obvious purpose, at least 130 of them have been found across northern and central Europe, yet not a single one has been found in Italy. They're also completely absent from ancient texts and artwork. There are a few hypotheses surrounding what they were used for. They may have been of store of value, religious symbol, coin testers, or standard pieces in a metalsmith's portfolio. But to date, we're still really not sure. Number 10, the Tecasich-Calixtlahuaca head. Now, besides being an incredibly hard name to pronounce, the Tecasich-Calixtlahuaca head is out of place. It appears to be from Roman times, however, for some reason or another, it was found in an Aztec burial site about 65 kilometers west of Mexico City. Made of terracotta and crafted in about 200 AD, there's concrete proof that it was made during the Roman period. Questions surround exactly how it found its way to Mexico. One possible explanation is that a Roman, Phoenician, or Berber ship somehow made its way to Mexico. Maybe it was on purpose, maybe it was simply a shipwreck that drifted away. Either way, the ship found itself on Mesoamerican shores. This is especially plausible because during this time period, the Romans had a settlement on Lanzarote, which is an island offshore from modern-day Mexico. There's a fair chance that a ship originating from here simply drifted to the area inhabited by the Aztec. Another explanation is that it's an import from an early European visitor to central Mexico. It is believed that the burial might date to the period of Spanish exploration of the Americas. It is therefore possible that a conquistador brought the statue over to Mexico. There have even been suggestions that the statue was brought by the Vikings. After all, we do know that they traveled to eastern Canada, meaning that perhaps the head statue somehow migrated south through a trading network. A final explanation is that it's all a big hoax. You see, the head was originally found by archaeologist Jose Garcia Payon in 1933. One theory is that Hugo Modano, who was the supervisor of the dig, played a prank on Garcia Payon by planting the head on site. However, this explanation is purely speculative, as all those who participated have since passed away. This means that to this day, the head's origin is ultimately up for debate. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Number 9. The Baghdad Battery. So as far as we know, the ancient world didn't have access to electricity. Further still, the historical record tells us that the Italian inventor Alessandro Volta invented the battery in the year 1800, and it wasn't widely used until far later. However, the Persians may have figured out how to make one over 1,000 years earlier. In 1936, German archaeologist Wilhelm König unearthed 3 interesting pieces just outside of Baghdad in Iraq: a 13-centimeter tall clay pot, a copper cylinder encasing, and an iron rod. Its origin and purpose still remain unclear. König speculated that it may have been used as a battery. You see, the corrosion of the metal and later experiments both suggest that if an acidic agent like wine or vinegar was in the jar, it could have generated an electric current. König supports this observation with the fact that a number of very fine silver objects from ancient Iraq are plated with very thin layers of gold. Perhaps this gold was electroplated onto these objects. In 1978, this hypothesis gained further traction when Arne Egebrecht, who was the past director of the Ancients Museum in Germany, reportedly reproduced the electroplating of gold onto a small statue. However, there are no written or photographic records of the experiment, making it impossible to verify. As you might imagine, the Baghdad Battery had its fair share of skeptics. Critics point to the fact that it was set up in such a way that attaching a wire to it and running a current would be impossible. Instead, many suggest that the vessel was simply used to hold scrolls. It is worth noting that there is a middle-of-the-road explanation. Paul T. Kaiser of the University of Alberta noted that Egebrecht used a more efficient modern electrolyte, and that by only using vinegar or other electrolytes available at the time, assumed that the battery would be very feeble. This in turn would make electroplating impossible. However, Kaiser still believes that the device was used as a battery. However, his hypothesis is that it was used for mild electrotherapy for pain relief, possibly through electroacupuncture. Well, Mythbusters put that theory to the test by linking several jars that were similar to the Baghdad Battery, and incredibly enough, they were successful as they were able to conduct enough power for electrotherapy use. Unfortunately, when the US invaded Iraq in 2003, the original Baghdad Battery was looted from Iraq's National Museum. Its current whereabouts are still unknown. Number 8. The Daqui Spheres. Known locally as Las Bolas, the Daqui Spheres are found in Costa Rica, and they date back to 600 AD. Made by the indigenous Daqui people, they are a mystery even to modern historians. They range greatly in size, coming in anywhere from a few centimeters to over 2 meters in diameter. They also weigh up to 14 tons. Most of them are sculpted from gabbro, which is a coarse-grained equivalent of basalt. However, a dozen or so are made of limestone and another dozen out of sandstone. To make them, it appears that natural boulders were hammered with other rocks and then polished using sand. While some are very well polished, others are way more coarse. The degree of precision and workmanship here varies considerably. The issue with these stones is that there's very little information for us to go off. Historians believe that the first began to be created around 600 AD, with most dating back to between the years 1000 and 1560. But it's difficult to know this with much certainty. After all, the Daqui people were wiped out by the Spaniards. Further still, the only way for us to date the stones is by using geological reference points. However, because most of the stones are no longer in their original positions and locations, this is difficult to determine. It didn't help that when the spheres were finally found by modern archaeologists, havoc had already been wreaked on many of them. You see, they sat abandoned until the 1930s, when the United Fruit Company began clearing the Costa Rican jungle for banana plantations. Upon finding them, many workmen pushed them aside with bulldozers, damaging them in the process. Others, inspired by tales of hidden gold, began to drill into them and then blow them up with dynamite. By the time archaeologists and authorities intervened, many of them were destroyed. Today, virtually all of these spheres have been taken from their original locations, while a collection of 6 still reside in the courtyard of Costa Rica's National Museum. They may have served as astronomical tools, or simply as landscape decorations on a chieftain's property. Yet no matter what their purpose, they certainly are unique, and they stand as an interesting round relic of the past. Moving on to number 7, Rongo Rongo. While Easter Island is best known for those massive moai head statues, one artifact that doesn't get enough love are its Rongo Rongo tablets. Now, in essence, Rongo Rongo is a system of glyphs that likely made up some sort of early language. However, to date, no one has deciphered their meaning. Spoken exclusively by the Rapa Nui people of Eastern Island, Rongo Rongo first began to be studied by Western academics after the colonization of the island. While there, 24 or so wooden objects were found bearing Rongo Rongo inscriptions. They came in all shapes and sizes, ranging from irregular pieces of driftwood to an important chieftain's staff. They also came in all sorts of conditions. While some are easy to read, others are heavily weathered, burned, or otherwise damaged. To date, no one's able to fully decipher these artifacts. However, we do have a few clues as to how Rongo Rongo works. We know that the text is written in alternating directions. The correct way to read them is from left to right and bottom to top. That is to say that the reader begins at the bottom left-hand corner of a tablet, reads a line from left to right, then rotates the tablet 180 degrees to continue on the next line. The writing then continues onto the second line of the tablet, at which point it finishes off the first. Roughly carved into the shape of humans, animals, vegetables, and even geometric shapes, they were inscribed on the wood using either pieces of obsidian or shark's teeth. But unfortunately, historians are more or less at a loss when trying to interpret them. That's because apart from a portion of one tablet which has been shown to have to do with the lunar Rapa Nui calendar and uses possible genealogy, none of the texts are understood. This is largely due to information gathering issues. Now, first and foremost, literacy was a privilege in the Rapa Nui society. This means that only scholars were allowed to write. Since the most influential families disappeared during the Peruvian slave raids in the 1800s, those who still live on Easter Island have not been able to pass the knowledge of translation from generation to generation. There's also a very small sample size and lack of context surrounding these illustrations. All of this ensures that deciphering work is near impossible. Today, all examples of Rongo Rongo have been taken off of Easter Island and are either in the hands of private collectors or museums. If you want to see some for yourself, you can visit the Bishop Museum in Honolulu, the Musée de l'Homme in Paris, and the National History Museum in Santiago, Chile. Number 6. Liber Lenteus. If you're a bookworm, you'll probably appreciate the Liber Lenteus. That's because it's not only the oldest text in Europe, but it's also a document that's yet to be fully translated. Its origins are pretty obscure. The story goes that in 1848, a man by the name of Mihaljo Barik left his job on the Hungarian Royal Chancellery and traveled across several countries. He eventually made his way to Egypt, where in the city of Alexandria, he purchased a sarcophagus containing a female mummy. When he returned to Europe, Barik displayed the mummy in his home in Vienna, standing it upright in the corner of his sitting room. At some point, he removed the linen wrappings and put them on display in a separate glass case. These linen wrappings, for some reason or another, contained a strange text, the text of what is now called the Liber Lenteus. Now, it wasn't Barik who found it. You see, when Barik passed away, his brother inherited the mummy and donated it to a museum. Once at the museum, a German Egyptologist by the name of Heinrich Brüsch examined the wrappings and noticed the strange text. At first, he thought they were all Egyptian hieroglyphs. However, after further study, he realized that they weren't Egyptian at all. He concluded that they were a form of Arabic, yet he was wrong. Upon further examination, the code was finally cracked. The manuscript was written in, of all languages, Etruscan. For those of you not well versed in ancient history, the Etruscans inhabited ancient Italy. This made the Liber Lenteus strange. After all, how did an Etruscan manuscript make its way to ancient Egypt? Many experts think that the linen and the mummy may not be closely related. That is to say, while the mummy was of an Egyptian woman, the Etruscan linen was just what was on hand for the burial. Further still, exactly what the Liber Lenteos says is up for debate. Certain local gods mentioned within the text allow the Liber Lenteos' place of production to be narrowed down. It's believed to have been written in an area southeast of Tuscany, close to the modern-day city of Perugia. In total, there are 230 lines of text with 1,330 legible words, but only about 500 distinct words or roots. However, only 60% of the text has been preserved. Though the Etruscan language is not fully understood, many words and phrases can be deciphered enough to give us clues about the subject matter. Here, both dates and the names of gods are found throughout the text, giving the impression that the book is a religious calendar. Such calendars are known to have existed in the Roman world, providing not only the dates of ceremonies and processions, but also the rituals and liturgies involved. Number 5. The Main Penny. As far as we know, the Norwegians got as far as Canada before heading home. In the year 1021 AD, they created a small settlement in what is now the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. They managed to stay there for as long as 20 years before indigenous raids and other hardships forced a departure. Yet, for some reason or another, an out-of-place Norse coin was found way farther south. You see, on August 18th of 1957, amateur archaeologist Guy Mellergan found a Norse coin from the late 1000s in Penobscot Bay, Maine. A 1978 article in Time magazine called the discovery site an ancient Indian rubbish heap. In total, 30,000 items were collected from this site, with the coin being one of them. Like most of the 30,000 items, the coin was not well documented. In fact, it was initially mislabeled as a British penny from the 12th century. It was only in 1978 that it was reclassified as Norse, and according to historians, it was minted between 1065 and 1080 AD, and widely circulated in the 12th and 13th centuries. The penny was found with a perforation at the top, probably for use as a pendant. It's because of this that at some point down the line, it likely transitioned from pocket change into jewelry. And as you might imagine, there's a lot of speculation as to where the penny comes from. There are some who believe that it's evidence that the Vikings traveled farther south than Newfoundland, eventually getting to the United States. However, this isn't too likely. After all, the main penny was the only Norse artifact found at the site, which, according to substantial evidence, was a hub in large native trade networks. This in turn suggests that the Vikings didn't have a presence there. Instead, the more likely explanation is that the coin was obtained by natives elsewhere, and since the coin was minted after the Vikings left their Canadian settlement, it's not from there. However, there's a chance that even after leaving, the Vikings continued to trade in Canada. We also know for a fact that the Vikings traded in Greenland for hundreds of years, so the coin was likely given to an indigenous group in Greenland or Canada, and through trade channels, it eventually found its way south to Maine. Of course, as with many artifacts on this list, there are naysayers. There are many out there who believe the entire thing is just a hoax. After all, by the time the coin was found in 1957, it was quite easy to get coins just like it on the open market. Mellergan could have had the means and opportunity to plant the coin at the site, or he could have been deceived by someone else planting the coin. While the motives for such a move are unclear, there's a very real possibility that it's all a big prank. What do you guys think? You think the coin's genuine or just a publicity plant? Let me know in the comments. Number 4. The Dead Sea Scrolls. Under normal conditions, parchment paper will rot away over the centuries. However, caves provide very stable atmospheric conditions, and it's thanks to this that the Dead Sea Scrolls have withstood the test of time. Likely they were written by Jewish priests known as the Essenes between the years 135 BC and 73 AD. Their discovery was pretty incredible. The story goes that in late 1946, Bedouin shepherds were exploring one of the so-called Qumran caves in the West Bank when they found a jar filled with 7 scrolls. They immediately took them home and eventually they brought them to Bethlehem to be sold. After going through a few dealers, they eventually sold one for an unspecified amount and an additional 3 for a grand total of 7 Jordanian pounds, or the equivalent of about $400 today. In 1947, they were then brought to the attention of John C. Trevor of the American School of Oriental Research. After the end of the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, Trevor and other academics arrived in the West Bank and began to seriously investigate the Qumran caves. From then until 1956, archaeologists began to come to the area en masse, and in time, 800 to 900 scrolls were recovered from a series of 12 caverns. Written in a mix of Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, scholars were able to interpret them and divide them into three distinct categories. 40% of the scrolls belong to the first category, which consists of copies of texts from Hebrew scriptures. 30% come from the second category, which consists of Jewish scriptures that were not canonized in the Hebrew Bible. The final 30% belong to the third category, which consists of various rules and belief of specific sects within Judaism. However, there is one scroll in particular that has garnered a lot of attention. It's known as the Temple Scroll. This 8-meter by 15-centimeter parchment meticulously details how the Essene priests wanted to destroy what they viewed as a corrupt Jerusalem, and then build a new and pure temple in place of the old one. This still leaves us with some obvious questions. Why were these scrolls hidden in the first place? Well, we can look to ancient Romans for the answer. You see, in 68 AD, they brutally put down a Jewish rebellion that was in then the Roman province of Judea. Featuring retribution, the Jews fleeing the Roman rampage hurriedly stuffed the documents into the Qumran caves for safekeeping. There's even evidence to suggest that there was once a fort in the area to protect the area's growing Jewish population. And it is also worth noting that the parchments were well preserved thanks to the area's geography. Due to Qumran's proximity to the Dead Sea, the area is dry, arid, and low in humidity. And furthermore, the caves have very little airflow, and the scrolls themselves have a lack of tanning materials. This has all contributed to their longevity, allowing these scrolls to be in the incredible shape that they're in today. If you'd like to visit them, most can be viewed at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. Number 3. The Antikythera mechanism. When you hear the word computer, maybe a MacBook, Alienware, Dell laptops, probably what comes to mind. However, historians were thrown for a loop when in 1901 they found what seemed to be the world's first computer, known as the Antikythera mechanism. It was retrieved from an ancient Roman shipwreck. The story goes that a crew of sponge divers found the wreck while out finding sponges. They then called in the Greek Navy, who then uncovered bronze and marble statues, pottery, unique glassware, jewelry, coins, and above all, the mechanism itself. At first, it wasn't exactly in the best condition. It just looked like a lump of corroded bronze and wood. This caused it to go unnoticed for about a year in the National Museum of Archaeology's archives. However, on May 17th of 1902, an archaeologist found that one of the pieces of rock had a gear wheel embedded into it. Gears like these should not have appeared in ancient Greece or anywhere else in the world until many centuries after this shipwreck. It was because of this that the find generated a lot of publicity. It was dated to about 100 or 200 BC. The mechanism had a complex system of gears and dials. Now, this type of tech didn't emerge until the 1500s, making it seem about 1700 years ahead of its time. However, figuring out what it represents has been pretty difficult. Over the decades, the original mass has split into 82 fragments, leaving a fiendishly difficult jigsaw puzzle for researchers to put back together. Early work in 1959 by Princeton science historian Derek J. LaSola Price had been instructive. Once his studies were complete, he posited that the mechanism was used to predict the position of planets and stars in the sky, depending on the calendar month. Working almost like an astronomical clock, a mechanism like this would be useful in ship navigation, as it would be able to do the work of several astronomers in a fraction of the time. We also know that despite being found on a Roman ship, it has at least some Greek origins. After all, its construction relied on the theories of astronomy and mathematics developed by Greek astronomers during the 2nd century BC. It was also found aboard a ship filled with Greek treasures, further advancing that hypothesis. Of course, there still are some remaining questions. Chief among them is the technology's death. That is to say, why did it take over 1,000 years for scientists to reinvent anything as sophisticated as this mechanism? Further still, why is the mechanism the first of its kind? Why haven't we uncovered more? After all, we have strong reasons to believe that this object can't be one of a kind. There must have been precursors to its development. One explanation is that bronze was a very valuable material. Therefore, when an object like this one stopped working, it likely would have been melted down for scrap metal. It's because of this that shipwrecks may be our best prospect for finding more of them. Number 2. The Shroud of Turin. Of all the artifacts on this list, few are as famous as the Shroud of Turin. That's because many believe that its creation is nothing short of a miracle. The idea behind the Shroud of Turin is that it held Jesus Christ himself. More specifically, it's a length of linen cloth that bears a faint image on the front and back of a naked man. The details of the image are consistent with traditional depictions of Jesus after his crucifixion. It's because of this that members of the Catholic Church have venerated the shroud for centuries. However, its history is a bit spotty. We don't have a clear record of it from the time of Jesus' crucifixion. Its recorded history only begins in 1354. In that year, it began to be exhibited in the Collegiate Church of Lire, which is a village in north-central France. It was then acquired by the House of Savoy in 1453 and later deposited in a chapel in Chambéry. It sat there untouched until 1532, when it was damaged in a fire. In 1578, the Savoys moved the shroud to their new capital in Turin, where it's remained ever since. Today, it's located in a specially made chapel, and it's now the property of the Catholic Church, who gained ownership after the passing of the former King Umberto II in 1983. Ever since, it's been publicly exhibited only rarely. Some of those events have included the marriage of Prince Umberto in 1931, the 400th anniversary of its arrival in Turin in 1978, and during several papal visits in the 2000s. As a result, if you want to see it, you gotta settle for a replica, but there is one located at Turin's Museum of the Shroud. Of course, the million-dollar question here is whether or not the shroud is genuine. Well, opinions are mixed. It seems that at the very least, the cloth may be from the time period. In 2022, Italian researchers used a wide-angle X-ray scattering analysis to determine that the fabric was from sometime between 55 and 74 AD. Now, this is just a few decades off from Jesus' crucifixion. However, other evidence obscures this finding. For example, the herringbone weave used in the cloth was likely not used during Jesus' time period. Additionally, older radiocarbon evidence suggests that the cloth is not 2,000 years old, but rather from the Middle Ages or the Renaissance. There is even less certainty surrounding the actual imprint on the cloth. Those in favor of the cloth's authenticity point to the fact that scientific examinations have found no evidence of pigments, dyes, or inks being responsible for the image. In fact, the image is not absorbed into the fibers like traditional paint or ink, but instead appears to result from oxidation and dehydration of the cellulose. Since only the topmost fibers of the linen are affected, the print was likely formed by a surface-level chemical reaction. The idea is that it was because of this that the cloth's imprint had something to do with Jesus' crucified body radiating underneath. Now, those against the cloth's authenticity state that it would have been possible to create this type of imprint using medieval technologies. For example, in the early 1990s, scientists used a dust transfer technique that would have been known at the time to create a solid replica. Then, in 2009, organic scientist Luigi Gasciarelli used a medieval acid technology to create a full-size replica, when its details were not as consistent as the original, but they were still quite close. What's more, there's also some inconsistencies with the blood stains on the cloth, as it appears to have dripped on not all at once, but at different times. It's because of this that there's also a strong basis in fact that the shroud may not be authentic. Now I bounce it back to you. Do you think the Shroud of Turin is real, or is it just medieval forgery? Let me know what you think in the comments. Number 1. The Voynich manuscript. Of all the documents and books out there, few are as strange as the Voynich manuscript. It's named after Polish antique bookseller Wilfrid Voynich. This manuscript has had a strange past. Its paper trail is nearly impossible to follow. It appears and disappears throughout history, from the library of the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II to a secret sale of books in 1903 by the Society of Jesus in Rome. But what makes the Voynich manuscript incredible is that every single bit about it, from how it was made to the language it was written in, are still a mystery. What we do know is that it was printed sometime between the early 1400s or 1500s, and that it was printed in either Italy or Central Europe. Rather than use paper, it was made of at least 14 full cow skins. It also used a strange type of ink made of gall nuts, egg, fruit peels, and wine. Based on the subject matter of the drawings, the content of the manuscript falls into 6 sections. Section 1 is botanical and contains drawings of about 113 unidentified plant species. Section 2 is astronomical and astrological and includes astral charts, zodiac symbols, and nude women. Section 3 is a biological one and contains miniature nude women with swelled abdomens. Section 4 is an elaborate array of 9 cosmological medallions, many drawn across several folded folios, depicting possible geographical forms. Section 5 is pharmaceutical and depicts over 100 species of medicinal herbs and roots. Section 6 has continuous pages of text, possibly recipes, with star-like flowers marking each entry in the margins. Now, while the pictures are of some use, they pose more questions than they solve. The language also doesn't help. To date, we've not been able to translate it into English, even though American and British codebreakers from both World War I and World War II have tried their hand at it. What we do know is that there's approximately 20 to 25 letters in an unknown script, with a few additional strange letters that happen only once or twice. Since there's no strange breaks and a smooth writing style, it's believed that the book is not encoded but simply written in a language that's yet to be discovered. It's also worth mentioning that there's a few things that we can decipher. For example, the months of March to December in one of the pictures was written in Latin, while an inscription in High German was written under one of the women. However, these haven't provided much insight into what the manuscript could be saying. The manuscripts also remained unsolved by statistical analysts. When looking for patterns, many emerge. Practically no words have fewer than 2 letters or more than 10, and some words happen in only certain sections or in only a few pages. Others happen throughout the manuscript. Few repetitions occur among the 1,000 or so labels attached to the illustrations, and there are instances where the same common word appears up to 5 times in a row. Words that differ by only 1 letter also repeat with unusual frequency, creating Babel-like text. When all of this is put together, it creates a massive conundrum. As put by cryptanalyst Elizabeth Friedman, statistical analyses of the manuscript are doomed to utter frustration. Well, in any case, if you want to give the Voynich manuscript a go, it can be accessed at Yale University's Benneke Rare Book and Manuscript Library. However, access is restricted in order to preserve the delicate manuscript for future generations. You got to apply to see it, and even then, you need to prove that you actually need the original for research purposes. If you don't fall under this crowd, you can access the high-resolution images of the entire thing in Yale's digital library. Click here to watch our previous video on the top 15 most unusual historical artifacts. Thank you to our channel members.